So thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Today we'd like to dedicate our program and our class to His Holiness Ramakrishna Swami Maharaj. Maharaj is a stalwart in ISKCON, and he's a very dear follower of Srila Prabhupada, who's been preaching throughout the world for many years and inspiring the devotees. And he has visited South Africa so many times and has contributed so much to the growth and development of the movement here. And he has been very wonderfully, bravely, and in an exemplary manner facing terminal cancer, which is taking its toll on him. So we would appreciate if everyone keeps Marge in their prayers, chant extra rounds for him, and we pray so much for the Lord's mercy and blessing. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyakari Vastutyadishatarine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyakari Vastutyadishatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Gaura Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Gurudev Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev Jai Gaurahari Ki Jai Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Sanatana Swami Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Gaurahari. So we will start with our prayers. Om Gyanatimirandasya Dinangina Shlakana Shurana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Ye Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamahyam Dati Swapantam Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Bhaktivedanta Swami Vinam Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Charine Devi Sheshwanivari Vastrapradeshaya. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to serve. As we present an overview of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. This is a book by Srila Prabhupada that's based on the biography of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu called the Chaitanya Charitamrita. This book was written by Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. It has the wonderful histories of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his precious teachings. I pray for all your mercy to do justice to this class as we try to understand these teachings better so that we can improve our services and our love for the Lord. So today's class is based on chapter 16, which is called the conclusion of teachings to Sanatana Goswami. We recall that these teachings began in the third chapter, and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has been wonderfully enlightening him right from the beginning of devotional service and one's initial inquiries into Krishna consciousness, all the way to these very detailed explanations of a verse of Srimad Bhagavatam called the Atmaram verse. So this verse in particular was discussed in chapter 15, but Lord Chaitanya is going to continue the last part of his discussion on this verse in chapter 16, which we are on right now. And then towards the end, he's going to give Sanatana Goswami some final instructions on the book Hari Bhakti Vilas, which is what Sanatana Goswami, the book that Sanatana Goswami wrote based on those instructions from the Lord. So because these explanations are once again quite detailed, we will split the class up over a few weeks. I think it will be 3, so this is part 1, and we'll begin with the invocation. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. And the translation is: Glory to Shri Chaitanya and Nityananda, glory to Advaita Chandra, and glory to all the devotees of Shri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. Okay. So in Lord Chaitanya's explanations, he first began explaining the Atmaran verse word by word. So he gave multiple explanations of each word. And for us, in order to understand how this was applicable to the greater context of the verse, we would periodically stop and insert those words into the verse for us to understand how it could change the meaning. This was to keep us in context because we're not Sanskrit speakers. And we can tend to lose our way a little bit with all these explanations. So it's similar to how in English one may have a meaning of a word like bear, and we can explain to somebody who's not an English speaker that bear has different meanings. It can mean to carry something, and it may mean um, it may refer to an animal, a bear. But unless we use it in a sentence, somebody would not have the full idea of how it's used and what that actually means, because we can physically bear something, but you can also, in a figurative sense, bear something, tolerate something with the word bear. So in the same way, these words all have various meanings, and we had been putting them into the entirety of the verse meaning to keep our focus. But because Sanatana Goswami is, of course, an expert in Sanskrit, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave him all the word by word explanations initially. He didn't have to put it into context for him periodically like we were doing. But towards the end of his explanations, this is what he's doing. He's actually explaining now all these words in the context of the entire meaning of the verse. So therefore, what we'll discuss today and probably next week may seem like repetition, because it is. It's not Chaitanya Mahaprabhu now saying to Sanatana Goswami in more detail what we were doing a bit superficially to keep ourselves focused by putting all the various words into meanings of the verse. So repetition, of course, in Krishna consciousness is never a bad thing. It just helps us to understand things better, because we're not great scholars like Sanatana Goswami, but we're following humbly in his footsteps, trying to understand what the Lord is explaining in this verse. So we will now remind ourselves of what the verse is. This is Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 7, Text 10, the Atmaram verse. Suta uvacha Atmarama Muneyo Nirgranta api urukrame kurvantiya haitatim bhaktim ittam bhuta guno harihi. And the translation is, Sutta Goswami said, all varieties of Atmaramas, and in parenthesis, those who take pleasure in the Atma, or spirit self, in parenthesis, especially those established on the path of self-realization, though freed from all kinds of material bondage, desire to render unalloyed devotional service unto the personality of Godhead. This means that the Lord possesses transcendental qualities and therefore can attract everyone, including liberated souls. So, in putting now all the words together, starting from the beginning, like we had been doing, Lord Chaitanya had explained last week the different types of impersonalists, because we said that this verse has been highlighting all kinds of transcendentalists, meaning people who are on the path to achieving a spiritual reality, whatever that reality may mean to them. It may refer to the formless aspect of God called Bhagavan, it may refer to the Lord within the heart called Paramatma, or it may refer to Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavan, Sri Krishna. Either way, anyone who is trying to attain God by any of these paths is a transcendentalist in the very broad sense. But there's so many different types of them. And this verse is particularly mentioning two classes, Munayo Nirgranta, two types of transcendentalists who will be attracted to Krishna, despite them being on completely different spiritual paths to attain his other forms, and they will be drawn to achieving him through devotional service. So what Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had then mentioned was from these two classes, he had called them those that cultivate knowledge, in particular, to attain liberation. So he had mentioned that one division of this is the Mayavadis, the impersonalists, and in particular, the impersonalists worship Brahman in order to achieve Brahman. And he had mentioned that there were three types. The neophyte, one is beginning on that path, one who is absorbed in Brahman realization, so they have made more progress, and now they are realizing Brahman to the point that they are not aware of anything else in this material world. They're absorbed in as Brahman, but then the third one is Sri Brahman. So this stage, which is called the Brahma Bhuta stage, is highlighted by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, but it's not a stage that's only for those who are on the path of impersonal realization. So those who are on the path of Bhakti Yoga, for example, those who are devotees of Krishna, they can also get to the Brahma Bhuta platform, but they don't think them with Krishna. The impersonalists do when they get to the stage. They understand themselves to be one in quality with Krishna. So they find themselves ultimately as the supreme, the soul who is eternal, full of knowledge and bliss, like the supreme soul, but who is always the servant of the supreme soul. Those who are on the impersonal path, though, they get so amazed by this level of happiness and bliss and this freedom from all material attachments and this this great spiritual awakening that they achieve when they realize Brahman, that they get carried away and think themselves as God. So there are other groups of people who also achieve or want to achieve Brahman, but they don't worship impersonal Brahman to get there. This is why we said that the impersonalists, in particular, they want to achieve oneness with Brahman, but they worship Brahman for that. So who are these other people who don't worship Brahman, and who do they worship? So they cultivate knowledge for liberation into Brahman, but they may worship other aspects of the transcendental path, like demigods, for example. There are a lot of people who worship demigods, especially Lord Shiva, and although they are worshipping him, their ultimate understanding is that he is a form of the formless Brahman, and that ultimately they will become one with that formless Brahman, who is the source of Brahma. For that matter, they believe that Brahman is the source of Krishna, Narayan, all the other forms, worshipable forms of other transcendentalists. And many do believe that they can worship any form, Durga, Ganesha, or Shiva, and they will achieve the same end, the source of everyone's forms, which is Brahman. So thus they have knowledge of Brahman. This is what they are cultivating. That's why the Lord calls them cultivators of knowledge. But their methods of worship are different than their personals. So now we can see that these words, like Munayoho, for example, had been explained in their dictionary sense by the Lord before, and now they're being put into context as how it's referring to all the worshippers. So the Lord says, persons who cultivate knowledge for liberation are of three kinds. So now we're talking about these people who worship other forms other than impersonal Brahman to get liberation into Brahman. Those who simply desire liberation, those who are liberated already, even while in this material existence, and those who are actually self-realized. So those who are desiring liberation are obviously people who want this very much. They may be neophytes in the process, but they haven't become liberated yet. Then the second class are those who are liberated already, so they become free of all the material attachments even while they're in this world. And then those are actually self-realized. Once again, those who have attained this Brahman platform, they understand themselves to be spirit souls, but because they don't see themselves as servants of Krishna, they see themselves as one Brahman. There are many persons in this world who desire liberation, and sometimes they engage in devotional service for this purpose. It is corroborated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, Text 26, that those who actually desire liberation give up all kinds of demigod worship and without envy concentrate their minds in the worship of Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When such persons come in contact with a pure devotee, they engage in the devotional service of Krishna and give up the idea of liberation. So it means that even though these people start off with the idea of wanting liberation and wanting to worship whoever will grant them that liberation, whichever demigod they think is so capable, When they come in contact with the principles of devotional service through the mercy of a devotee, they respectfully give up the worship of other demigods, and they continue on the path of devotional service. So it's very important that they give up that desire for liberation. The desire for liberation is rooted in a desire for oneself. It's not selfless at all. So it can't be spiritual or transcendental. A verse in the Hari Bhakti Sudadhaya states, O great soul, although there are many flaws within this miserable life, yet there is yet one glory, the association of pure devotees. Cultivate such association. By it, our desire for liberation diminishes. This is a very nice verse. We see, of course, many similar verses in Srimad Bhagavatam. This desire for liberation is very strong, and we will see in the next paragraphs why. It is about as strong, sometimes if you consider even worse than the desires that one has for material things, and we have to be able to give it up. And this is the power of the association of your devotees. We remember from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, that by the association of devotees, a service to devotees, and by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, all that is troublesome to the heart is destroyed, almost destroyed. And this is one of these things is the desire for liberation. In Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 2, text 37, it is stated that man's fear is due to his material conception of life and to his forgetting his eternal relationship with the Supreme Lord. Consequently, he finds himself having only perverted memories. This occurs due to the spell of material energy. One who has sufficient intelligence will engage in full devotional service and regard the Supreme Lord as his spiritual master and worshipable God. The conclusion is that no one can attain a revolution in consciousness without engaging in devotional service to the Lord. When one is actually free from material contamination, he can fully engage himself in Krishna consciousness. So as soon as the spirit soul falls into the material world and comes under the spell of material nature, this disconnection from the Lord leads to the spirit soul experiencing the most intense fear. It's not in its nature to be on its own away from the Lord. And so this fear is so pervasive in this world that the spiritual world is actually referred to as Vaikuntha, it's a place of no anxieties, whereas the material world, being its diametric opposite, can only be full of anxieties, full of fears. So the spirit soul, so full of these fears, comes to the point of wanting to get out of this material world. So it drives him very much to attain liberation. Everybody wants to be free of all miserable conditions in this world, all driven by fear, all this all-pervading sense of fear. So the living entity wants very much to get liberation from that. But in attaining to spiritual life, in attaining to devotional service to Krishna, one is put back into connection with the Supreme Lord again. And from that we can understand that the living entity's fears are immediately diminished by engaging in devotional service, because one is in contact with the Lord, one is in the shelter of the Lord, that natural position that the living entity is supposed to be in. And that, of course, will drive away all fears, even if the living entity is in this world. So it means that real liberation, real freedom from all fear is devotional service. And so it means that no one has to actually chase physical liberation at all. Just by engaging in devotional service, one can have all the benefits of liberation. One can be truly liberated. In Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 14, Text 4, it is clearly said that one who engages in spiritual life to understand things as they are, but who lacks all intention of engaging in Krishna consciousness, simply achieves trouble for his undertaking. So that means anyone who is on the path of spiritual life, whether to achieve impersonal Brahman, Paramatma, or any other of the forms of the Lord, but doesn't take to devotional service, is inviting trouble to themselves, that's all. It's a very strong statement. There is no substance to his life. Every living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and therefore it's the duty of every living entity to serve that Supreme Whole. Without such service, the living entity falls into material contamination. No matter how much effort that one makes in the spiritual path, one will keep falling into material life until one gets to devotional service to Krishna. Lord Chaitanya concluded his teachings to Sanatana Goswami by pointing out that the 6 kinds of Atmaramas, or transcendentalists, engage in some kind of devotional service to Krishna. In other words, at some time or another, all the transcendentalists ultimately come to understand the necessity of rendering devotional service to Krishna and become fully Krishna conscious. Even if one is very learned or extravagant, he can still engage in the devotional service of the Lord. So this is what we said repeatedly while we're putting ourselves in context, that the word Atmarama refers to different classes of transcendentalists. But eventually, all of them become attracted to Krishna because he is so supremely attractive. So the verse references him in a few ways, Urukram and Harihi, and all the different qualities of the Lord is indicated by these names, also discussed by us as well. And when they become attracted to him, they also realize that the only way to attain this all-attractive Lord is through devotional service, which has also been discussed by us in so many different forms. So those different kinds of transcendentalists, they will either worship Krishna on their different paths in a somewhat indirect way, because we had also said last week that Krishna is actually present in all his forms because he is all his forms. Brahman is a form of his, Paramatma is a form of his. So anyone who is dedicatedly worshipping Brahman or worshipping Paramatma is actually worshipping the Lord. He's accepting that worship. And even when they're worshipping the demigods, those demigods very humbly offering all that worship back to Krishna, because he is the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, we remember from Bhagavad Gita as it is. So ultimately, they could be worshipping the Lord in that way, but they could also be mixing elements of their different parts with bhakti, if they encounter bhakti. So this is when we refer to that mixing as Jnana Mishra Bhakti, for example, Jnana mixed with bhakti. Or they may just come all the way to devotional service and directly serve the Lord. So we're going to discuss very interesting aspects of how one could actually attain Krishna through other parts of the mystic yoga a bit later on. It was very interesting discovery to me as well. So the 6 kinds of transcendentalists are the neophyte transcendentalist, the absorbed transcendentalist, one who is situated in transcendence, one who desires liberation, one who is actually liberated, and one who is engaged in activities in his constitutional position. All of these are Atmaramas. So we've discussed all the different transcendentalists as they fall into all these categories. When a person becomes an Atmarama or a great thinker in Krishna consciousness, he fully engages in devotional service. So according to the grammatical rules, there are many kinds of Atmaramas, but one sense of the word is sufficient to represent the others. In the collective sense, all the Atmaramas are inclined to worship the Supreme Lord, Krishna. So the grammatical sense here means that the word cha after the word Atmarama in the first line, it says Atmaramasha Munayoho. So it means that even if we mention Atmaram once, it's referring to all these 6 kinds. The word cha indicates that Atmaram has more than one meaning. And this is how it can indicate that more than one class of transcendentalists, all classes of transcendentalists basically become attracted to Krishna and take to devotional service. So the mystic who worships the super soul within himself is also an Atmarama. So we're going to focus our discussion now on this very interesting class of transcendentalists, those who practice yoga to achieve the Supreme Lord. The Atmarama yogis are of 2 kinds, Sagarbha and Nigarbha. It is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 8. Some yogis meditate within their hearts on the localized Vishnu, who is 4-handed and who holds 4 symbols, conch, disc, mace, and lotus. The yogi who thinks of the four-handed Vishnu becomes absorbed in devotional ecstasy and shows the symptoms of that state. Sometimes he cries, and sometimes he feels separation from the Lord. In this way, he merges in transcendental bliss, resulting in his becoming trapped like a fish. So I was very fascinated with this, that mystic yogis can experience ecstasy. And this is the discussion point on this paragraph. About the Sagarba and Nigarbha yogis, we'll come to them in later paragraphs that focus more on those two divisions. So we'll just take this aspect about the ecstasies of mystic yogis, and Srila Prabhupada explains this a bit more in the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, chapter 28, 634. So we'll read part of that purport. Here it is clearly mentioned that meditation, which is an action of the mind, is not the perfect stage of samadhi or absorption. So samadhi is a state of complete absorption in Krishna, right? Absolutely nothing else exists besides Krishna. It's a very elevated stage of consciousness. And many people, though, take this term to mean that samadhi is the ultimate stage of meditation, and that basically one can mostly only attain samadhi through meditation. Meditation, of course, we're referring to as mystic yoga here. So Srila Prabhupada says no, that although one can get to samadhi through mystic yoga, through mystic yoga, it's not actually the highest way to attain samadhi. Let's see why he says that. In the beginning, the mind is employed in attracting the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But in the higher stages, there is no question of using the mind. So what does this mean? In the beginning of meditational yoga or mystic yoga, the mind is used to attract the Lord to oneself. So how does that happen? Krishna explains in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita about how the yogi has to leave behind all kinds of worldly activities and relationships and go and live in a very quiet, sanctified place where they will not be disturbed, because the mind has to be very, very focused on the Supreme Lord in order to bring the Lord into one's internal vision. So this necessity is, of course, what makes yoga so difficult in this age. But if one is able to do this, then one renounces everything, goes off to this sacred place, and then one withdraws completely from all sense activities, forcibly by the mind. So the mind is able to shut off all the sense activities, and then the mind can actually begin to focus on the Supreme Lord so intensely that one eventually realizes the Lord. One actually, when we say realizes, means one actually becomes completely aware of the Lord within one's heart, and one can therefore see the Lord within. So Srila Prabhupada continues. A devotee becomes accustomed to serving the Supreme Lord by purification of his senses. So there's the difference. Whereas the meditational yogi or the mystic yogi has to forcibly withdraw the senses from all sense activities by leaving behind the sources of sense activities and going off to somewhere where they won't be engaged in them, and then still more controlling them by not being distracted, for example, by sounds, by not wanting to taste things in particular. In fact, they generally end up cutting off all kinds of eating processes slowly, drinking processes. Some of them eventually are living only on air or ether. And so all of the senses are brought under control by force, by withdrawing it. But a devotee, however, right from the beginning, is trying to purify their senses by devotional service. Srila Prabhupada says that this is much higher. In other words, the yoga principles of meditation are required as long as one is not situated in pure devotional service. So the only way that one can bring one's mind, for example, under control enough, one can absorb the mind enough in the Supreme Lord by bringing the senses under control is through meditational yoga, if one is not engaged in devotional service. Devotional service has the effect of not only purifying the senses by the activities of devotional service, but one is also able to focus the mind fully on devotional service as well, because all one's activities are for Krishna. So the mind is fully absorbed, the senses are completely purified. And so in that state, the devotee is able to associate with the Lord directly. The mind is used to purify the senses. This is by the mystic yogi. But when the senses are purified by meditation, this is by a devotee, there is no need to sit in a particular place and try to meditate on the form of the Lord. So the only way that the mystic yogi is able to meditate on the Lord is if they're sitting in one place, withdrawn from everything and trying to see him within. But the devotee who has achieved the purification of their senses to devotional service and has their mind now fixed on the Lord is able to engage in any activities anywhere in the world or the universe for that matter, because they're actually in constant samadhi or constant absorption in the Lord. One becomes so habituated that he automatically engages in the personal service of the Lord. So it's just natural for a devotee who is thus engaged in service to the Lord so purely, that he's just in samadhi all the time. When the mind forcibly is engaged upon the form of the Lord, this is called nirbija yoga or lifeless yoga. For the yogi does not automatically engage in the devotional service, the personal service of the Lord. But when he is constantly thinking of the Lord, that is called sabija yoga or living yoga. One has to be promoted to the platform of living yoga. So this mystic yogi who has to force themselves to focus on the Lord, they can't just engage in devotional service, although we're going to come to some very interesting discussions later on and very probably rare and interesting aspects of mystic yoga. They could actually come to some kind of worship. But aside from that, a mystic yogi doesn't engage in devotional service. They can just realize the Lord, experience that kind of ecstasy that we described above. But because they haven't been able to purify themselves, purify their senses or any of their other limbs in devotional service, they can't engage in the service of the Lord. So basically what we're saying is they can only realize the form of the Lord. They can't actually associate with him. They can't experience his wonderful pastimes. They can't experience his personality. They can only experience his form. In order for one to go further than the form, in order for one to experience this living yoga, Sambhija yoga, which is one's ability to serve and associate with the Lord with all these other expressions of his full personality of Godhead, one has to be engaged in devotional service. The Sagarbha and Nigarbha yogis can be further divided into three categories. So now these mystic yogis also have divisions. The beginner, the advanced yogi, and he who has attained perfection. These yogis are described in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Those who are trying to ascend the path of mystic yoga are called Arurukshu yogis, beginners. In Arurukshu yoga, one practices various sitting postures and concentrates the mind. So what's interesting is that this is just the beginning stage, but for many people conventionally in the West and also in the East, people think that the postures and the sitting postures and the breathing exercises and so on are actually what constitutes the yoga. But this is only the beginning, and this is why it only yields fairly temporary and somewhat insubstantial results. To be advanced and to be perfected in yoga are very different things. So the next stage, the advanced stage, one ascends the path of yoga by means of meditation and detachment. So this now, the advanced stage, is complete meditation. It's not a few minutes a day. It's not even a few hours a day. It's not a few days a week. It's complete meditation and complete detachment from everything. Like Srila Prabhupada used to observe that most of those people who were around him in the mid 60s who were so-called yoga practitioners, they were still smoking, they were still maintaining bad habits. But one has to be completely detached from everything material, particularly, of course, bad habits, but everything material in order to be advanced in yoga at the second stage. And to get to the perfectional stage is when one gets to this ecstasy that we described called yoga rudha. That's when someone is able to actually realize the Lord heart. If such a mystic yogi somehow or other comes in contact with a saintly person, he becomes a devotee of Krishna. So, of course, this can happen at any stage in yoga. And just as we described before, no matter how advanced one may be in any spiritual discipline, when one comes into Krishna consciousness, and that takes one directly into contact with the all-attractive Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, Krishna, one can make very great advancement to truly achieving him in the entirety and the sweetness of his aspects, Krishna, the Supreme Lord. The word Urukram has already been explained. It indicates the Supreme Lord. All the Atmaramas are engaged in devotional service to Urukram. Before engaging in devotional service, such transcendentalists are called Shantas or pacified devotees. So this is another interesting point. Like we had clarified last week, Brahman and Paramatma are features of the Supreme Lord. So these persons who are worshipping those features, they are devotees. They're considered devotees here even before engaging in devotional service. But what they achieve out of all the relationships with Krishna is what we call Shanta, pacified or in the neutral stage. So why is that? So we described by referencing the Bhakti Yoga processes that when one ascends from Shraddha all the way to Asakti, which is the stage of attachment to Krishna, one is also detached from all material things. And then, of course, one is able to get fully attached to Krishna. We call that Rati. And from there, one is able to realize a relationship with Krishna and progress further to deepening their emotions, their bhava, and then that, of course, can become prema. So these persons who have made such great strides in their respective fields of transcendental life, they are actually achieving that detachment from material things. And they're getting attached, consequently, to whichever form of the Lord they're actually absorbed in or worshipping. So whether that is Brahman or whether that is Paramatma, they have actually achieved a relationship with the Lord somewhat in this neutral way through their attachment to him. So they could develop that relationship further, of course, by taking to devotional service. But devotional service then grants them the opportunity to develop a relationship with the Lord in any of the other rasas, which require more emotion to be expressed. So Dasya requires more emotion than this neutral stage. But the relationship of friendship requires more emotion than Dasya ras and all the way up to Madhurya ras. Of course, they can remain in the stage of neutrality also. The great devotees like the Kumaras worship the Lord in this way. And others actually develop relationships in the spiritual world, like that of the cows, the Lord's flute. And this is how the relationship of neutrality is expressed by these transcendentalists. The word Atma or self is sometimes translated as mind. Sometimes mental speculators present philosophical theories in different ways, but when they come in contact with saintly persons engaged in devotional service, they also become devotees. So now, separately of the mental speculative path of impersonalists, we also have other types of people who we could say are mental speculators, and they are philosophers. They are people who like contemplation. This is practiced in a lot of mystical traditions. And so by their pleasure that they take in the mind, this is a definition of Atmarama, when Atma is referred to as the mind. They can also, through all of their theories and contemplation, if they are serious enough and sincere enough, they can also find Krishna. Krishna is the endpoint of all searches for truth, because he is the absolute truth. So for a sincere seeker, he will be revealed. So now we come back to the two divisions of yogis. This paragraph has been put into our flow. So let us describe these persons a bit more. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, chapter 87, text 18, describes the two classes of yogis. So this is what we said before, the Sagarbha and the Nigarbha yogis. So they are described as follows. The yogis begin their practice of yoga by worshipping the abdomen, and then they try to concentrate their attention on their intestines. Gradually, their meditation rises to the heart and they concentrate the mind there. Then they gradually direct their attention to the top of the head. One who can raise his meditation to that position is understood to have become perfect and to be no longer subject to birth and death. Even such yogis render causeless devotional service to the Lord when they come in contact with pure devotees. So these persons are quite serious. They are able to actually eventually get to the point of real liberation. This is more than just liberation from material things. This is ability to not come back to the material world, which is a lot more than the regular impersonalists achieve. So this requires a little more reading and explanations. With the point, of course, that even if they're attaining such high and unusual levels, they are still drawn to devotional service. Devotional service is always more natural and more simple or sublime for such persons. But about how they can actually become perfect and be freed from the material world, meaning they attain the spiritual world, we will refer to the actual verse that Srila Prabhupada mentions here and the purport from Srimad Bhagavatam. And this will also explain to us what these two words mean, Nigarbha and Sagarbha. So the translation from Srimad Bhagavatam. Among the followers of the methods set forth by great sages, so this is methods of mystic yoga, those with less refined vision worship the Supreme Lord as present in the region of the abdomen, while the Arunis worship him as present in the heart. So it's two different classes of mystic yogis. Those that worship him as the Supreme in the abdomen, and those who worship him as present in the heart. In the subtle, present in the heart, in the subtle center from which all the pranic channels emanate, right? So from the heart, all the levels of all the channels of pran come through. From there, O unlimited Lord, these worshippers raise their consciousness upward to the top of the head, where they can perceive you directly. So this statement is being made by the personified Vedas to Krishna, to Lord Narayan, to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is implying that when these mystic yogis are able to raise their consciousness to the top of the head, which is then implied to be beyond Paramatma, which is in the heart, they can actually realize Bhagavan directly. Then passing through the top of the head toward the supreme destination, they reach that place from which they will never fall again to this world, into the mouth of death. That's the spiritual world. Let's see how Prabhupada helps us understand this. In the purport, he says, here the Shrutis, so that's personified Vedas, who teach meditational yoga. So we know that the Vedas contains the process of meditational yoga. They're glorifying the personality of Godhead. The various processes of yoga are for the most part gradual and full of opportunities for distraction. So Prabhupada is saying right at the beginning that even though we're going to hear of how someone very rarely can achieve the perfection of yoga by achieving Krishna, it's very difficult. It's very long, gradual, and full of opportunities for distraction. It's not guaranteed that one will get to that level. It's not like how Krishna promises in the Bhagavad Gita that even if one makes the littlest progress in direct devotional service to him, one never loses it. In fact, when we read from the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we read that even after a mystic yogi has made a lot of progress, they don't come back and start mystic yoga again. When generally, although born with the promise there is that they will be born in a family of aristocracy or in a family of Brahmins. But there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to make progress in mystic yoga from where they left off in their previous life. But it's different with bhakti yoga or devotional service. One always picks up where they left off. Authentic methods of yoga, nonetheless, all aim at meditation on the Supersoul, Paramatma, whose primary residence is in the region of the heart alongside the Jiva soul. This manifestation of Paramatma in the heart is very subtle and difficult to perceive, Dharam, and thus only advanced yogis can realize him there. Neophyte meditators often practice focusing on the Supersoul's secondary presence in one of the lower centers of vital energy. So the Supersoul actually has another presence besides the heart. So these are in the lower three chakras. These are the Muladhara chakra, base of the spine, the Swadhisthana chakra, this is in the navel, and the Manipur chakra, which is in the abdomen. Lord Krishna refers to his expansion as Paramatma in the abdominal chakra as follows. This is interesting because this is a verse from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, text 14, and the Lord is actually in this verse referencing himself as present in these other chakras. I am the fire of digestion in the bodies of all living entities, and I join with the air of life, outgoing and incoming, to digest the four kinds of food. So that's Krishna. And in this capacity, he is actually Brahman. So as Brahman, he is in these lower three chakras in the abdomen, and as Paramatma, he is in the heart. And as Bhagavan, he is actually in the crown chakra at the top of the head. So Lord Vaishvanara presides over digestion and in general bestows the capacity of mobility on animals, humans, and demigods. In the judgment of the Shruti, speaking in this verse, those who limit their meditation to this form of the Lord, so that is in the abdomen, the Brahman, are less intelligent. Purpadrishaha, that's what they call them, meaning literally having eyes clouded by dust. So they are they have to actually raise their consciousness from this to the Lord within the heart. So these people are called the Nigarbha because they don't believe that the Lord has a form. They have to elevate themselves to becoming Sagarbha, which is where the yogi accepts the Lord as having a form, that of Paramatma in the heart. This is the next type that we are talking about. The superior yogis known as Arunis, on the other hand, worship the Supersoul in his form as the indwelling companion of the Jiva in the heart, the Lord who endows his dependent with the power of knowledge and inspires him with all varieties of practical intelligence. So we had said that Brahman grants eternity, Paramatma grants eternity and knowledge, and it is only Krishna who can grant us the eternity, knowledge, and bliss through associating with him. Just as the physical heart is the center of blood circulation, so the subtle heart chakra is the crossroads of numerous channels of prana called nadis, which extend outward to all parts of the body. When these passageways have been sufficiently purified, the Aruni yogis can leave the heart region and go upward to the chakra at the root of the brain. So it doesn't just stop there at realizing Paramatma, it goes even further. Yogis who leave their bodies through this chakra, the Brahmarandra, go directly to the kingdom of God, from which they never need to be reborn, which they need never return to be reborn. Thus, even the unsure process of meditational yoga can bear the fruit of pure devotion if it is followed perfectly. So Prabhupada again is cautioning us that this is an unsure process, but if one gets the right direction, and actually worships the Lord at the Brahmarandra, which is, of course, as I'm sure, as complicated as it sounds, then they can actually get the fruit of pure devotion, at least in attaining Supreme Lord, if not attaining all the relationships with Him that one gets through devotional service. So, what do we mean by the right guidance and the right worship? So, let's take the translation of the same verse now, as it is given in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, for us to understand that. Those who follow the path of great saintly mystic yogis, right? So it's already telling us that if we just try to engage in mystic yoga the way it is now, some teacher from around the corner, or somebody who means well but isn't a great saintly mystic yogi, it's going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get to this point of having a perfection like one would achieve through devotional service from mystic yoga. So one has to follow the path of great saintly mystic yogis. Then they take to the yogic gymnastic process and begin worshipping from the abdomen, where it is said that Brahman is located. Such people are called Charkaraksha, which means that they are situated in the gross bodily conception. There are also followers of the rishi known as Aruna. Following his path, so these are Arunis or the Sagarbhas, they observe the activities of the arteries. Thus, they gradually rise to the heart where subtle Brahman, namely Paramatma, is situated. They then worship him, or unlimited Ananta. Better than these persons are the mystic yogis who worship you from the top of their heads. So they still have to worship the Lord. It's just through the process of mystic yoga. Beginning with the abdomen and proceeding through the heart, they reach the top of the head and pass through the Brahmarandra, the hole at the top of the skull. This is the crown chakra, usually referred to as crown chakra. Thus, these yogis attain the perfectional platform and do not enter the cycle of birth and death again. So, this is quite interesting. It's very different, but it shows through the prayers of the personified Vedas that at the end, Krishna is the goal of everyone and everything, and that one still has to worship his personal form. Just we see that there is even a process in mystic yoga in order to do that, in order to attain the highest liberation of attaining his spiritual planets and never coming back to the material world. Attaining anything else is not going to guarantee that we won't fall back and we won't struggle with the fears and all the other miseries of this world. So thank you all so much for your kind attention, and please join us next week where we'll continue chapter 16 of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Gaura Hari ki jai. So are there any questions or comments or anything that needs to be clarified? I'm sure that was a lot to take in. I needed clarification from Ranganath Bhatta Das Prabhu with what I was reading to get the right idea. So
Hare Krishna Mataji, please accept my humble obeisances.
Hare Krishna Ji.
Thank you very much for the very wonderful class. I have one question. A person who is in
Sure.
clinical death, and many of them return back from this clinical death. Where what level they reach? Because many of them said,
They actually, yeah.
I saw the God, I reached and I spoke with him. What level is it?
So it's very interesting because all of the experiences of different persons who leave are very different. There are some that actually have the exact opposite. They see terrifying creatures. Basically, we've said the Yamadutas, and there are others who don't see anything; they just see the light. So I would say that depending on what level of advancement they may have achieved, maybe from their past lives, if not their present life, they could attain to a state of meeting a higher spiritual personality. But unless one is spiritually realized, they're not going to actually be able to perceive who God actually is. They may achieve the association of even perhaps one of the demigods, or what is more likely, above this planet, since we are in Bhuloka. Above us is Bhuvarloka and then Swargaloka. So at Bhuvarloka, we have entities that are somewhat, they're higher than ordinary living entities in this world, but they're not exactly, they're not spiritual beings, of course. They're sort of, I'd say, in between human beings and demigods. So they're like mystic creatures. They could be yakshas and others. So if one may encounter such persons, one may think that they may be encountering God, for example. So unless like somebody expressly is able to describe the Lord's speeches, I would say that they may not have exactly encountered him. It's not an ordinary thing to be able to see Krishna directly and speak to him. So, but there are other godlike creatures or even godly creatures, associates of the Lord, like the Vishnu Dutas that one could come in contact with. So there's such a wide possibility. Just depends on the descriptions of whoever's encountering um, these persons for us to understand who exactly it is that they have met. Is that okay?
Thank you, Mataji. Dandava pranams. Hari Bol.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. Is there any other questions or comments? If not, we are going to sing the Nrsinga Pranams for His Holiness Kadamakanana Swami Maharaj. Like we were saying, beginning Maharaj is the most extraordinary spiritual personality and is facing terminal cancer right now. It's intensified in the last few days. So we encourage everybody to pray very hard for Maharaj, chant extra rounds for him, join the programs that are being held in his honor for prayer and these are happening at different centers, and sing with us tonight for him and keep his wonderful legacy going, of course. So we will focus our hearts on the Lord in prayer. Namaste Narasimhaya, Namaste Narasimhaya, Praladadayine, Praladadayine, Hiranyakashipu Vakshaha, Hiranyakashipu Vakshaha, Shilakanakalaye, Shilakanakalaye, Ito Nrsimho, Parato Nrsimho, Ito Nrsimho, Parato Nrsimho, Yato Yato Yami Tato Nrsimho, Yato Yato Yami Tato Nrsimho, Bahe Nrsimho, Hridaye Nrsimho, Bahe Nrsimho, Hridaye Nrsimho, Narasimhamadin, Sharanam Prabhave, Narasimhamadin, Sharanam Prabhave, Narasimhamadin, Sharanam Prabhave, Narasimhamadin, Sharanam Prabhave, Avatarakam Lavare Nakam Adhuta Shringamita Hiranyakashipu Tanupehingam Keshavadeta Hari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Avatarakam Lavare Nakam Adhuta Shringham Lalita Hiranyakashipu Tanupehingam Keshavadeta Hari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Nrsimhadev 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 Jaya Nrsimhadev Jaya Nrsimhadev Nrsimhadev Lakshmi Narasimha Jaya, 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 Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj Jaya, Prahlad Maharaj Jaya, Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj Jaya, Prahlad Maharaj. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Bhakti Vakni Vinasa Shri Shri Lakshmi Singh Bhagavan ki jai, Bhakti Shresh Prahlad Maharaj ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Sanatana Swami Maharaj ki jai. So these are the programs that are being held in Melbourne, South Africa for Maharaj, and we encourage everybody to please attend them. Thank you again so much for your attention, your participation, your blessings to be able to cover these explanations on this wonderful verse. And please join us next week. And please do continue your prayers for March, for all his disciples, well wishes. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Swami Maharaj ki jai.